I was born from Jewish parents, but my father never had any Jewish connection at all. Literally none. As a matter of fact, the most popularly observed event in Jewish families is the Seder on Passover. Until I, as a teenager, wanted one, he had never seen one. And I was Quaker educated. One always learns who you are through the other. I guess there are those who can go into silent contemplation and discover the most hidden part of themselves, but I'm not like that. I learn who I am through the other. And I learn much more about my Jewishness, and I learn much more about who I am in the relationship with the other. In the Jewish tradition, the victim is not obligated to forgive. The one who has perpetrated an injury on the other is obligated to make amends. There are traditions that clearly espouse that, in fact, it's a flaw in the other if they cannot forgive. In the Jewish tradition, to forgive is a wonderful thing, but that's not the obligation. I mean, after all, who are we to say what is necessary for a person who's been victimized or hurt or injured or beaten or robbed or witnessed a murder? Who are we to somehow hold them, be judgmental of them if they can't forgive the other? And while we have an ideal of forgiveness, the obligation in the Jewish tradition is on the one who might have wronged the other. The responsibility is always on the self. And the responsibility is, if you have done something wrong, you can't know what's in the heart and mind of the other. You have to make amends on its own. And you can't sit by as an objective observer and say, what's wrong with that person because they haven't forgiven. Forgiveness is what a person is willing to do. There are some people that have reached a point in their own life where they say, I have to move on. For my own sanity, from my own stability, from my own making sense of things, I have to move on. And therefore, the other, the one who may have caused harm, becomes irrelevant to that process. They become part of history, but the person has moved on. There are others for whom the absence of retribution, compensation, is the stumbling block that allows them ever to get beyond. So I would say that one never knows what's the significant factor in allowing somebody to forgive. As I say, one has to be careful not to hold the victim accountable. To blame the victim is the way we would say it in the United States. If a person needs to be, if someone who is appropriate to forgive means that something has happened to them. If you assume that somebody must forgive, you're blaming the victim. You're saying they have responsibility for something that they didn't cause. The more complex situation, but one which happens more often than not, is when there's competing victimization. Competing victimization. I'll give an example that I gave publicly this morning at the session, where there was a discussion about German and Jewish relations 2 generations after the Holocaust. And the general tendency is for people to think the Germans were perpetrators and Jews were victims. But I learned an interesting lesson because I used to run programs for Jewish students, American Jewish students, to go to Germany. And when the program was put together, it was more or less, how do you bring 3rd generation people together to make sense of things? But when I was there, I learned an interesting lesson. It's not clear in that generation how to define who the victim was. For example, if you're a grandchild of somebody who is in the Gestapo, or you're a grandchild of somebody who worked in the death camps, aren't you a victim? What is that? Can you imagine growing up? Can you imagine growing up with such a burden? Knowing that in your family there was somebody who put people to death knowingly in the nadir of human existence? That generation, those generations were both victims. Human relations often have complexity to them, and a dynamic that doesn't always make it clear who's the hurt and who's the one who hurts and who's the one who is hurt, and often both can feel hurt at the same time. In real life, that's more likely to be the case than the most overt cases of genocide and massacres and things like that.